Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Mark Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family business and entrepreneurs. Please allow me to introduce you to our two sponsors, Matt Butler.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Who on the call hasn't used YouTube to figure out how to do something? I'm pretty sure it's everyone on the call has done it because it's a powerful tool that's easy to see, words and visuals that combine to give you a complete picture of the topic you're interested in. That's what's missing in solving business problems, though. We've got no shortage of words between meetings and conference calls and emails, but there's no visual. And like we've heard a million times, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's why we created our proprietary visual imaging process to show you, and we'll work with your team to show them for the first time how your processes are actually creating your problems. And once they see that complete picture of how the process works, it's very easy to come up with the solutions. We're so confident in our capabilities that we're always willing to take our compensation as a portion of your savings and increase profitability. So if you'd like to learn more, give us a call. In just 30 minutes, we could take you through the process that shows how we can help solve your problems while increasing your profitability. Thanks, Mark.
Matt, thank you very much. John Custer, partner at Custer & Custer.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for joining us. Custer & Custer is a family-owned law firm outside Philadelphia. We work with entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses, ranging in size from startups to lower middle market. We work with clients on matters from incorporations, intellectual property and buy-sell agreements, to vendor contracts and buying and selling businesses. There's no cost to tell us about your issues, and depending on the project, we can quote you a flat rate. So please feel free to contact us with any questions at custerandcuster.com.
John, thank you. And Matt and John, thank you for being sponsors of this program. Much appreciated. So, Melanie, we're so glad to have you today. I've unmuted you. Welcome, Melanie Parish, one of the top executive coaches in the world and a winner of the prestigious Prism Award. So, Melanie, before I start asking questions about your book, could you please tell us about your consultancy and how you started it?
Sure. And Mark, thanks so much for having me today. I love talking to people who are leading organizations, and I definitely have a sweet spot for family business. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I've been a coach for 20 years. So in 1999, I was actually working as a mortgage broker. And I had looked around in the world to see who I thought had, pretty good income. And I decided to be a mortgage broker, but it weighed heavily on my mind. It wasn't the right fit for me. I wanted to be helping people at a more intimate and deep level. And someone talked to me about coaching, and I became a coach. And in the early days, I started by doing a lot in sales and marketing. I had done sales in high school and in university. And so people would come to me to try to grow their businesses. And over time, my same client stayed with me. I've had one client I've had for 20 years. And as her sales grew, then we started to have more challenges that were around production, around employees, around hiring. We started to do more. And then in about 2013, I started to coach a lot in IT. And I had a client who brought me lots of clients in IT, and I started to work with them. And I started to have a different sort of view of the world. So I tend to coach sort of high potentials at this point, people who run their own companies. I like to coach decision makers. So that's kind of where I've ended up now.
Well, congratulations on your book. And I also see it on the wall behind you. So I thought that's pretty smart marketing. So why did you write this book, and how did you come up with the title?
Sure. I was working in IT. I was watching people as they tried to come in and start to be leaders. And what I saw is that people are really good, high performance individual contributors, and then they get promoted. It's like it happens reliably over time. You get promoted, and all of a sudden you find yourself leading people without a roadmap. I also heard a lot about experimenting and trying new things. I did Mike Rother's course at the University of Michigan. He wrote a book called Toyota Kata, and it's a brilliant book. He did a great job with it. And he was talking about experimenting everywhere. And then I started to study some of Eliyahu Goldrat's writings. He's an Israeli physicist who worked a lot in manufacturing. And he talked a lot about bottlenecks. He wrote a book called The Goal. And I started to see how experimenting in the right place was really important. It isn't just to try experimenting everywhere. You want to do it. You want to do it really strategically. And so I started to think about how we don't want to just experiment blindly. We want to lead experimenting in our organizations. And so I started to think about what it would mean to be an experimental leader, how you don't know all the answers, but you find the answers as you go, and what kind of person you would need to be in order to do that.
How do you define an experimental leader?
The experimental leader is someone who stands in the middle, who helps support an experimental culture. And what that means is that they understand experimenting, they're quite skilled at experimenting themselves, and then they hold an experimental mindset for the organization, and they nurture experimenting in the people that report to them. So what that does for an organization is it takes away the dad leader, the all-knowing dad leader who knows the answer to every question. I cannot tell you how many organizations, I see William laughing, I can't tell you how many organizations I've been in where everybody has to go to the leader for an answer. And you start to see the bottlenecks that happen in organizations where there's just, the work can't move as quickly as it might because the leader has to answer every question. And so it removes that. It allows people to work in their sphere of influence and to start to empower employees to work on their own, but they're not doing it blindly. They're doing it in a data-driven way.
Okay. So is there some leader out there that we see every day, like an Elon Musk or somebody who you say embodies this principle?
Well, it's been really interesting in COVID-19. I feel like we're in like the Olympics for leaders right now. Every country is trying a different leadership style. I have dual citizenship. I actually live in Canada. And I actually, you sent me this question ahead, and I was thinking about Justin Trudeau because what I've seen him do is to have a very clear vision, but he hasn't tried to roll out what he's rolled out in a right way. He hasn't gotten it right at all. He rolled something out. I don't know if you know about Canada, but they rolled out a $2,000 a month. Anyone could qualify immediately. And if they didn't qualify later, they'd have to pay it back in COVID-19. His goal was to give people a reason to stay home and to put money into the economy at the right levels. He's done other, and then he started to get feedback, and people jumped up and down and said, wait, small business, this isn't going to work for a small business. So then they rolled out another thing. They never had a true plan. It's been very experimental in the way that they rolled out the support for COVID-19. And I think he's done a really good job.
And in the beginning, I thought you weren't telling us he was doing a good job, but it sounded like he fit the model, what you're talking about. What's the process a leader needs to go through to be innovative themselves?
Well, I think that's right. You're right. He didn't do a perfect job out of the gate. When we talk about Justin Trudeau, it was where he had a gap but he got the feedback loop. And so I think for an experimental leader to be good themselves, first they need to understand what it means to experiment, and what the term safe to fail means. So we don't want to just be experimenting blindly in every direction. We want to know clearly what the vision is. We want to experiment in those areas that it will have the right impact. But for example, we don't want to experiment with the 911 system. We want to take small, safe to fail areas where we can experiment. And so a leader has to understand what's safe to fail, and then to work collaboratively with the people that are in their organization to help everyone be experimenting in safe to fail ways across their sphere of influence. So you might have many experiments running at one time in an organization, but there's a goal behind each one. It's not, in many ways, everybody tossed their strategic plans in the last 2 months and started experimenting. That's not particularly safe to fail. We actually want to control it. So I've actually coached my clients to really try to bound their experiments even in uncertain times.
Do you see a difference between being an experimental leader and an innovative leader? Is there a difference?
I think that being an experimental leader is like buying insurance to be an innovative leader. You might luck into being an experimental leader. You might come up with the one good idea, but I do feel like that being an experimental leader lets your organization incrementally improve and avoid bottlenecks. It helps you move forward in a reliable and sustainable way. Whereas innovation can happen out of the blue. Often innovative companies come in and do something that's never been done before.
We lost your sound for a minute there.
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So how do leaders get their employees to take risk without worry about being burned if the attempt turns out badly? I think that's why a lot of people are afraid to take risk, and you talk about that in your book.
I do. I think this is at the heart of, I think this is one of the biggest problems in organizations in North America, especially when we talk about fast-paced organizations, drive. People come up with an idea and the organization doesn't hold that idea. It lives with one leader. And when that idea isn't good, then the leader goes down. You know, whose fault was this? It was Bill's idea. We want organizations that try new things. And we want the language in those organizations to say, collectively, we have a problem. We know we have a problem. And we want to collectively see how we can address that problem. And we want to agree on the experiment we want to try, but then we want to hold that idea collectively. So you may fail out of the gate, but you're collecting data. So what's the next experiment?
But how do you make sure that the employee doesn't feel like they'll get burned for taking that risk? What does the leader need to do to make that happen?
Well, I think they need to say, what are you going to try? What's your experiment? If you use the language of experimentation, then everyone can relax a little bit, because and you're going to bound these in short time cycles. You're not going to say what's the experiment you're going to try and not check in for 9 months. You want to check in. I always say you want an experiment that's going to last for 24 hours to 1 week. You want tiny experiments because you're collecting data and then you're pivoting many, many times over the course of a year.
I taught at the Wharton School for about 10 years, and that's a very data-driven school. And, and that's how they raise their leaders. And so are leaders relying too much on statistics to make decisions? And how do you, when you're working with your clients, because you're working with, I think, Fortune 50 clients, how do you get them not to rely solely on data?
Data's in the world of best practice. So it's something that's been done and it's already been measured. which there's absolutely a place for data-driven leadership, for statistics, for best practices. Best practices are really fast. If somebody's already done it and you want to do exactly that, then adopting a best practice is a fantastic way to go. If you want to do something that's never been done before, it's going to be a slog. It's going to feel like a startup. It's going to be hard. And the data you should be collecting is your own. It shouldn't be something that's already done before, because all that will get you is something that's already been done before. So this is the land of innovation. This is where you have to decide, are you duplicating somebody else? Are you going out into the marketplace to sell cars? Well, cars have been sold before. Or are you going to do something new? If it's something new, then you need to be collecting your own data. It needs to be very short cycles so that you get really good feedback loops with your clientele.
Okay. So
it's okay. You can push back.
No, that's all right. What backgrounds, marketing, sales, engineering, finance, research, prepare best for someone to lead? Is there a specific area that you think, based on your experience, prepares you best to lead an organization?
It's so interesting, and it's every organization can see, or each leader in the organization can see where their part of the organization could prepare them better. IT leaders often feel like they should head into senior leadership roles in the organization, CEO roles, because they understand the product if it's a technology organization. I love marketing. As experimental leaders, marketers are experimenters at their core, because they are trying things and there's direct feedback. Either sales go up or they don't go up. So there's a lot of data in sales and marketing already, especially with social media marketing and things where you actually get to see who clicked on what. I think that there is something special about people who rise. And I'm not sure that it's what background they come from, but it is something about them where they see a problem and they look for solutions and they leave their egos behind. I think those people are uniquely positioned to lead well. When they hear something new and their first response is, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. How can we do that? As opposed to, we've always done it this way. We will never do it that way. I just heard a story about a CEO in a tech company who refuses to do video calls in COVID. And I think that's a ship you should bail from. It tells me something about that leader, that they will not embrace new anything without a fight. And it's not a fight that I think that person should be having.
Pretty amazing that they're running a technology company and they're not embracing Zoom.
It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to me.
In Silicon Valley, you have a lot of young leaders, and often they aren't ready, no matter how smart and creative they are. We've seen it with Uber, we've seen it with Works, whatever the real estate outfit was. How do you prepare them to lead? How do you prepare people who are brilliant people, but they're not really experienced, but yet now it's been thrust on them to actually go and lead and build an organization?
This is the heart of my clients. These are the people that come to me. They are top contributors, they get promoted, and they're trying to figure it out. The first thing is that we talk about is that the imposter syndrome that they feel is normal. It doesn't mean anything. Every leader I've ever worked with feels it and has it in their lives. They have to grapple with that, but it's not definitive. The fact that they feel it doesn't mean that they're not good leaders. So we talk about that. The other thing is I start to have them looking up.
We lost you. Melanie, we couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. I live on Zoom, so it is what it is. What I was going to say is I want them to look up and I want them to look down. I want them to look at the needs of the people that report to them and to start to develop those people. We want them to have, we want people who are continuing to grow in the organization. We want to support them. And sometimes they've never had that thought before. If they've never led people before, they may not have that view to the people below them to think about what are they wanting more of. They become good leaders if they start to develop the people that work with them. The other thing is we usually talk about leading up, like thinking about, managing up. How do they talk to the people above them? Somebody took a bet on them. Somebody promoted them or hired them. And improving the feedback loops up helps them give the person they're reporting to a glimpse into the work that they're doing. And that helps solidify their place in the organization. And I also see with new leaders when they come in, often they think the value they provide, they're heavily weighted to believing that the work they put out is the value they provide to the organization. But the work that they provide is really different in a leadership role. What they want to be providing to the organization is vision for the future, understanding of the present, and a solid foundation to troubleshoot what happens in that organization to the people that are actually doing the frontline work. It's their job to help increase the throughput, it's a manufacturing term, but the throughput of the frontline worker, not to be producing that work themselves.
Is there a difference? Because I saw that you coach people all over the world. And I remember in the 80s that the Japanese seemed to, everybody thought they had a superior management style and leadership style. Is there any country that has an edge here in terms of developing managers?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I have clients in the UK and Canada and the US. I don't think I have any anywhere else right now.
Do you notice a difference between those three countries in leadership style?
I really do. So I believe Canada gets a little stuck in best practices sometimes, and that thwarts innovation, where the US may eschew best practices in the pursuit of innovation. And so there's some happy medium in the middle. And so I think that both have a tendency toward a certain, they orient to a certain way of thinking. When I moved to Canada, I was shocked at how much people talked about best practices. And I started to realize, that not everything has been done before, and it is part of the reason for an experimental culture is to try things that you don't know.
I'm sorry. Are you in the marketing for this seminar?
Sir,
You use Elon Musk? Yes.
sir, you have to put yourself on put yourself on mute. And just as I mentioned, ask only questions through chat. So just type your questions and we'll get to it.
Okay, that's going to stop me because I don't know how to do that.
All you have to do is go to chat on the bottom there and type in your question. And we'll get to it at the end.
Oh, chat, okay. All
Okay,
right.
thank you. If you can mute yourself, that would be wonderful. I'm sorry, go ahead, Melanie. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Oh. So the question was, is there a difference between the different countries in terms of how people manage?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think the biggest one is just the difference in the best practices and where I think that it's really important to choose where a best practice is your best strategy and where not having a best practice is the best strategy.
So are innovative leaders readers? I mean, what's the profile of an innovative leader?
I think they're readers. I think they have to get new information somehow. I also think that some of the CEO groups and those kinds of things are a really good way to get new thought and new ideas. Also to get good reading suggestions. I think that people read I sort of see that people read in two different ways. One is sort of the person who consumes book after book, and they always have a new thought. I get a client like this and they're like, have you read this? Have you read this? Have you read this? I also see people who read one good book and then they start to work at how they can integrate the learning. All of the research shows that one of the hardest things in leadership is to uptake and to actually integrate new ideas into your leadership. Going to a workshop and then the book just sits on the shelf. So the best innovators are those who start to uptake the ideas and then thread them through their organizations in a really intentional way.
How do you keep your employees from burning out?
Give them interesting work, real positive feedback, pay them at the level that is fair in the industry, and don't look for heroics. In Toyota, which is one of the places that you look to for lean ideas, they talk about heroics. You never want a job that requires heroics to be the status quo in an organization. You want a job that is doable and fair. You don't need the one super performer to be able to perform it. We don't want Joe to get hit by a bus and the whole organization fails. So we want jobs that are doable and rewarding. It's okay if you're launching a product or something is happening that's unusual, but we don't want all of the employees in the organization to have to go to give 200% all the time. That is the recipe for burnout.
So you write in your book, effective leadership is about being able to step back from work environment and study its intricacies with curiosity and intent. What are you talking about here?
Oh, that's a cool quote. I'm glad I said that. I think that there's a self-awareness in that. You don't want to be in it to the point that you can't see it as a leader. Part of the biggest job of a leader is to continue to hold the vision of where you want to go. I talk about timelines a lot in the book. A leader needs to be looking at a 20-year timeline, a 10-year timeline, a 5-year timeline, a 1-year timeline, a 6-month timeline, and a 1-week timeline. And depending on the layer of leadership, that's going to be different across the organization. I wouldn't expect the CEO to be having conversations about 1-week timelines, but I would want them to know in their head what a 20-year timeline might look like. Whereas the person who's tactical on the front line, I would want them to know what the 20-year timeline might be, but I want them to be really clear about their 1-week timeline.
All right, and you write, I'm going more from the things I picked up in the book. You write, being curious about small improvements and small observations is what being an experimental leader is all about. Why small? Why not large?
Large takes too long, and it's too late. You want to notice it early. You want to, one of the things that I always promote is prototype. What can you put into place today to see if it will work? And then later you can build it out. If it doesn't work, then you won't have invested heavily in it. You will have tried it to see. So you always want to do quick tests, roll something out with a pilot. If it's a product, what can you prototype? How can you get feedback on the prototype before you do it? Yeah, so it's that short feedback, and I cannot overstate the value of a leader being excited about the frontline work that people do. So if you see something that's working, giving powerful feedback that says, I really like where this is going, what will you try next? It's what moves people, and people are what move throughput in an organization.
So we had a gentleman who was just on, and again, everybody just ask your questions, write them out for us. He writes, Steve Jobs famously said that people don't know what they want until you give it to them. He took big experimental bets and didn't always win, but he kept driving his vision. I believe that leadership requires a certain amount of self-confidence, which may be read as arrogance. In the military, this requires sending men to their deaths. That's the ultimate in arrogance, disregarding to a degree the opinions of others. It applies to others like Elon Musk as well. How do you square this with your view of leadership?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's interesting because when something pays off or doesn't pay off, often what we see is the big payoff. But all tech organizations release things in beta. You know, they're not betting in a vacuum. So even if it looks like a big investment, and a big investment to Apple, or a small investment to Apple might look like a gigantic investment to me or to you. I think that you can set direction. I think you have to be clear on your vision. Apple didn't produce vacuum cleaners. They knew the space that they were in. They always knew that they were proprietary. They didn't share, like Microsoft had a platform that would go on different computers, whereas Apple has always been exactly who Apple is. So they had a really clear vision for that, and they haven't wavered from that vision, which has allowed them to experiment. They experimented for a long time where they were not having the kind of success that they had after they got the smartphone. So they did experiment in ways that they didn't succeed like they have today. I'm not sure that I answered the question fully. It's a big question.
Well, and the second part of his question is, are you really talking about management when you're talking about this, or are you talking about leadership?
Oh, I think that's a good question. I think the leadership is in the fact that it is a vision shift for most organizations. So is it management on a day-to-day? There is a management component of it. And that management component of having an experimental organization is really important. How will you track your experiments? How will you collect data? How will you do the repetitive tasks? Those are management tasks. Becoming an organization that experiments is absolutely a leadership role.
Another question is everyone cut out to be a leader, or some high-performing individual contributors better suited to maximize their unique skills in an individual role? I mean, oftentimes somebody who's a great salesperson, they keep moving them up the ladder, but maybe they're just better being a salesperson and just sticking to that as opposed to constantly moving them up.
I think some people don't want to be leaders. You know, they don't want to lead people. They may still be leaders. I often say that being the leader of your own life makes everyone a leader. We all lead our own lives. I don't know that everyone is cut out to manage people, but they can still lead. They can still lead experiments in their own sphere of influence. So even a frontline worker can come and say, hey, I see an opportunity here. I believe we should be moving forward in this way, or I'd like to try this. So leading can be in any role. Management, some people aren't cut out to be managers.
So an add-on to the first question, somebody else asked, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Someone else asked, as an add-on to the prior question, what's your opinion regarding being an aggressive leader as opposed to a more laid back, empathetic leader? Can this be different for different leaders?
Yeah, I believe, and I call it the dominant leader in my book. It is, I believe that being a dominant leader is really great if you're in a flood or a hurricane. You can stand in the middle of the room and tell people where to put the sandbags, and it's super effective. In an organization that isn't in the middle of a flood or a hurricane, what happens with a leader who's super dominant is that you only have one brain working in the organization, and everything has to filter through that one brain. And I believe that we are stronger in an organization if we have multiple brains working on the problems and challenges that we're facing. I think we have better opportunity to innovate if we're able to engage the minds of all of the people in the organization. I also believe that when people are in a reactive leadership style, like a dominant leadership style, someone who's aggressive, usually those people are afraid and they don't know what else to try. And so I hope I'm giving them a path with the Experimental Leader book of something else to try.
Has there been a change in leadership style and effectiveness during the last 20 years?
I think so. I think that's true. I mean, we see some of it's just diversity. I think there's been changes in diversity in leadership in general, and that would contribute to that. I think that there is more dialogue about voices being heard, about toxic leadership, about all of those things. We're at least talking about a lot of the things that we might not have been talking about 20 years ago.
How do you convince new leaders they shouldn't be afraid to admit what they don't know for fear of looking weak? I mean, that's always been kind of a problem, but people seem to be a little bit more open to it today. But I think especially new leaders are afraid to admit when they don't know something.
I think it's a really scary thing, and I think it's one of the best skills a leader can show is to say, I don't know, and then to talk about a path for where they will look for answers, and to go and ask the answers of people who might know across the organization. I do think that it is easier to say, I don't know now. When I started working with really high tech leaders and tech consultants, this was one of the things they did that I thought was really astounding. You know, they were highly paid consultants in Fortune 50 companies. And I would watch them say, I don't know the answer to that. Or I don't know what you're talking about. What is it? They would allow themselves to appear not to know everything. And I find it to be incredibly powerful and moving when I watch leaders do it.
How do you convince seasoned leaders to be more open to new ideas? I find that a lot of times as people get older, seen there, done that, and maybe an idea that didn't work 10 years ago is now ready to work. So how do you get seasoned leaders, people, let's say over the age of 50, 60, to be more open to ideas? What do you do and how do you coach them on this?
If I get to them, if they haven't already decided that they know everything they need to know and I actually get to them, then I would just call them on it. But I rarely get to those leaders. Those leaders are stuck in the organizations in the corners. And my suggestion would be to put them in charge of things that do call on best practices. They may be good at that. And if you don't have anything that you need them for, exit them because they will not help you innovate. And waste, often one thing I see with leaders is that they spend too much time thinking about the non-productive people. They want to spend their time focusing on the forward movement, not on what's the problem children in the organization. Usually leaders exit people too slowly.
So going along this path, you mentioned 7 toxic type leaders. What are they?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about those. I've talked about a couple. So you just talked about what I call a complacent leader. I talked about the dominant leader earlier. One that's like a near cousin to the dominant leader is the influential leader. And sometimes we call these charismatic leaders. And you think that's a good thing, except that if they are elevating their ideas and they're selling their ideas in an organization over all other ideas, you kind of have the same problems of not having everyone engaged in the solutions of the organization that you would have with a dominant leader. There's a stickler leader. They kind of make rules for everything. And rules can really get in the way of flow and innovation if they're not useful rules. And it's a defensive, these are all defensive defensive poses. The other is the conflict averse leader, the leader who won't address hard things and hard conversations in the organization. The naysayer leader, sometimes this is the role of the CFO in an organization, just to say no to everything. You want to make sure you're only saying no to things that you want to say no to, not to do it as a knee-jerk reaction. And then the last one that I'll talk about just briefly is, I call them the manipulative leader. And the manipulative leader may look a little bit like the charismatic leader, or it may look like a dominant leader. But the challenge with the manipulative leader is that they're in it for themselves. Whereas the dominant leader, the influential leader, may have the organization as their primary goal. The manipulative leader is always going to be trying to do what they can do to better their own prospects, their own career. And so they're pretty dangerous.
Is there a difference between men and women leadership styles?
You know, after coaching in organizations for so long, the biggest pain I see for women leaders is the things that run through their own minds.
Oh. Hopefully Melanie will be right back with us here as she is frozen.
Not wanting to be seen as aggressive or something like that. And I think it's really unfortunate. It makes me sad to see that.
So we missed part of that answer.
Sorry, it was a good answer.
Yeah. You were saying that I think that sometimes women are afraid to come across in a tough way, and maybe you can elaborate on that. And I would like to know, is there really a difference between men and women's leadership styles, or really that's not true anymore?
Well, I see really amazing women leaders, and I see really amazing male leaders. I don't think their gender defines their leadership. I do think sometimes with any marginalized leader who's in a marginalized position, who is trying to lead a team, those same things that might have an impact on their lives may impact their leadership. And I think that it's important to be aware of those things. No matter who we are, we need to look at where someone might meet sexism or racism or homophobia or able-bodied, issues or challenges. Like anywhere someone might be marginalized in their regular life, it may or may not affect their leadership. It will depend on the people they lead and the people who they report to.
So you mentioned vision in your book. You said that word vision is thrown around a lot. And what does that mean to you in terms of leadership, and how does a leader use it in an authentic way? I think that people use it as a buzzword, but how can they use it in an authentic way that people really believe they have a vision?
Sure. Well, I think the vision is how you orient to uncertain times. So what I've seen, especially in the last 8 weeks, is people who had a clear vision for their organization knew how they could shift or pivot. I'm so tired of those words. But it they knew what they could try. They knew where to experiment. So they weren't getting a blank slate. Their vision was what informed them on how they wanted to move forward. So for example, I have a client who writes diet books and has a line of products and has an international community. Real people, real food, real change is her tagline. And when COVID hit, a lot of her supplements were very desirable. So probiotics became very desirable. And some people were actually price gouging around some of these things. Instead, she gave people sort of a list of what of her products might be useful, and she put them all on sale because her goal was to support her community. Her vision was very clear. Her vision was not to make as much money in the short term as she possibly could. It was to have a community that she supported through uncertain times. And it's played quite well. She was very helpful, but she knew why she was being helpful.
And her whole organization got behind that, and it ignited their passion?
She's the CEO of the company. So yes, they got on board.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes it's, yeah, people hear it, but it really doesn't resonate with them. It doesn't sound real to them. And they go through the motions of doing whatever the CEO wants, but they're not exactly throwing themselves full bore at it. But it sounds to me like she did something that everybody feels like they could really get behind because she wasn't taking advantage of the situation.
I think that actually improved her relationship with her staff. I think they saw her do that and they got more dialed into the vision now than they ever were before because they saw it more clearly. Yeah.
How do good leaders formulate organizational stretching attainable goals? How do they put those things together? Because, sometimes you could set goals that are so unrealistic, nobody can ever hit them. But how do the good leaders formulate a goal that stretches them, but still makes it attainable? So they feel good at the end of the day that they feel like they're accomplishing something.
I think a good leader often sets a goal for themselves that has them have that little intake of breath where they go, just like it's just a little far. Like it feels like they're going to have to push towards something. I think for the organization, there really is a sweet spot, and it also can be somewhat experimental. The world changes. We know that now more than ever before. It's okay to reset the goal mid-year if you need to. Having a goal that people, like if you set the goal too high and by April, you're not going to hit it and the target's off, fix the target because you want people striving. So there is a way that you can take the same feedback loop, look at the numbers, and then adjust so that you take the failure early so that you can re-engage your team with the goal. So it's just at the edge of what's possible. And finding that is a bit experimental.
What's the profile of the employee's leader should look for to keep the organization sharp and hold the leader accountable? So what kind of employees should the leader be looking to hire that will also hold them accountable?
Depends on the role. So I do a lot of personality profiling using DISC. And I like it because I believe in diversity of personality profile as much as I believe in diversity in all other kinds of hiring. I want different brains working, but I want the right brain working on the right job. So if you have a role that requires lots of repetitive tasks, you want somebody who that is going to be fulfilling to them. You want somebody who's looking for stability. You want somebody who enjoys looking at numbers all day. If you have somebody who's going to be doing customer service, there's a couple of customer service profiles. One is sort of the tech expert that can dive into the tech of something and help people along. The other is somebody who's just super friendly and makes people feel good when they talk to them. You want to know which of those will work? Sometimes I hire to both those profiles. If you're doing in marketing, I think you're often looking for someone who has the right skill set for marketing. You want somebody who is skilled at social media and has proven success in the area that you're looking. And then you want to start looking at personality. Mostly I look at personality first, but in some verticals or some areas, I look for skill first.
What's the problem with developing a strategic plan? You talk about this in your book, about developing strategic plans. What's the problem with them?
Yeah, I really think that strategy is important, and having strategic intents, what you intend to happen in your organization is really important. Having a step-by-step strategic plan, it's problematic because as soon as you put the first step of that plan into place, your organization is going to change. And so if you have a 3-year strategic plan, you are working on outdated material. You're no longer current. So I like the idea of intents. So you intend what's going to happen in a 1-year time frame, and then you have operational intents that work in a 3-month time frame, and tactical intents that are in a shorter time frame, 1 week to one month. And those intents allow each person in their area to shift and to respond to what's happening on the ground. If you want to read more about intents, Stephen Bungay has a book called The Art of Action. It's a great book on intents. It's a military book. So you're applying it to knowledge work, but he talks a lot about intents and the why of intents as opposed to a plan.
A lot of people who are even on this call now want to become coaches. They want to do what you do. So what skill sets over the 20 years, what skill sets do you realize that you need to do this right?
Well, people think they want to be coaches sometimes because they have a lot of answers. When I wrote this book, it was actually outside of my scope because as a coach, mostly I have questions. So mostly I'm a thought partner along the way. I don't tell people what to do. That's more of a consultant. But I do believe that the power of the questions, helping people understand their own minds and then helping them develop sort of what they want to happen, goals, vision, dreams, all of those things is what coaching is at the heart of coaching. Anybody who comes to me being interested in coaching, and I talk to people about coaching every now and then. I love talking to new coaches. They want to find a coach program. I trained in 2 certifications in coaching, one at the Center for Right Relationship for team coaching and systems coaching. And that program would be great for anyone who leads an organization, even if it's just taking the fundamentals course. They just took all of their courses online. And then CTI, it used to be the Coaches Training Institute, and now I think they're calling themselves the Coactive Training Institute. And that's for individual coaching. So if you want to be an individual coach, and then get certified through the International Coach Federation. They do a good job of helping people be better coaches. I highly recommend anybody who wants to be a coach that they do the time because they'll be better at it, but they'll also find out what's in their blind spots, what they don't know that they don't know.
How have you changed as a coach since you started? Because you talked about that in your book, that you got advice from different, even clients, and that's kind of helped you evolve as a coach. So how have you changed over the 20 years as a coach?
Such an interesting question. I think I just get more and more humble. I just like more and more I know what I don't know. I have had clients who have become really successful in the time that I've coached them. And I've even had times where I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to fire me any minute because I just don't know what they know now. Like they've gotten so smart and so savvy and so successful. But what I've realized is that idea of standing with someone in the center of their business with them, often all of their collaborators and partners have a vested interest in one part of their business or another. And I'm able to stand there and have a dialogue with them about their own best interests. And I think they find that valuable. I find it to be, I find it an incredible place of privilege and a joy to do that with them. I think being a leader is lonely work. And I like that I can go on the journey with my clients.
Here's my last two questions for you. What books do you recommend outside of your own that should help aspiring innovative leaders read? And if there are any magazines or podcasts that you also recommend. So what things do you educationally recommend that people should pick up besides your book?
Yeah, I've recommended a few on this call already, but I like almost anything written by Eliyahu Goldratt, starting with the goal, especially if you want to learn where in your organization to focus. So bottlenecks. I love the Toyota Kata book by Mike Rother. Fierce Conversations is a book about just having difficult conversations in organizations. And so I think I often find that looking for the oldies but goodies in the business category is a good place to look. Covey, I still love Covey. And, Covey's been out, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is one of the best books ever written. Like I read it. I was a valet after college and I read it in the parking lot while I waited for people to pick up their cars until the owner decided I shouldn't be reading. And so I had to sit there silently. He was not somebody I should work with for a long time. But I think that's a good book still to read.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for coming out today and talking to us. We really appreciate it. We wish you the best of luck with your book and with your coaching practice. And maybe we'll hear more again and possibly you'll be writing another book based on more experiences that you're having.
The experiments go on and on. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's been just a real pleasure to be with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, everybody stay safe today, and we look forward to seeing you. Our next speaker is on Tuesday. It's How to Listen and How to Be Heard by TEDx star Elisa Carpenter. And so we look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Have a great day.